A lot of threats, wishing death upon me, telling me that, I'll be in jail with my mother, and saying things like, be glad it's 2020 and not 1920.
Were a lot of these threats and vile comments racist in nature?
A lot of them were racist. A lot of them were just hateful.
Perhaps you, like us, became acquainted with the now former Georgia poll worker Shaye Moss in the course of the January 6th Select Committee hearings. The sheer emotional weight of her staggeringly tragic testimony and that of her mother, Ruby Freeman, mesmerized the viewing public, laying bare the evil that was done to innocent, hardworking people in the name of the big lie. Well, today, it was a jury's turn to hear how Shaye Moss feared for her life in December 2020. She was on the witness stand in the civil defamation trial against Rudy Giuliani, one that will determine just how much the former New York City mayor will have to pay Moss and Freeman, up to $43 million in compensatory damages. It was a legal nightmare from the word go this morning for Giuliani, whose lawyers had to explain to the judge overseeing the case why their client told reporters yesterday that he told the truth about the election workers, despite the fact that he'd already procedurally admitted to making false statements about Freeman and Moss as part of a court filing in July. From there, Moss's testimony today updated and expanded upon what she had told the 1-6 committee. One of the most harrowing portions of her appearance today was how she described the effect that Giuliani's lies had on her son, who was 14 at the time of the election. From our NBC News colleagues who were in the courtroom today, quote, because he used Moss's old phone, he constantly received hate messages and voicemails meant for her, she said. Langford played some of those messages for the jury. Moss said her son ultimately failed every class in the 9th grade because of the situation. Quote, he didn't deserve that, she said. I had to tell him racism is real, and it comes out. And it was just, I can't even describe it. I felt like the worst mom ever to allow him to have to hear this, have to experience this day after day after day, end quote. So once again, another innocent life caught up in an audacious lie about non-existent fraud in the 2020 election. Joining us now, NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley, who's at the courthouse for us, former prosecutor at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, and MSNBC legal analyst Melissa Redman. Claire McCaskill rejoins us, as does Tara Palmieri. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being with us. Ryan, let's get to you. What happened today in court?
It was really dramatic testimony as you sort of walk through there from this election worker who was just talking about the devastating impact that these lies from Rudy Giuliani really had on her life. And just to sort of set, at where this happened, this was in early December of 2020 when some of these lies sort of taking out. So at that point, Rudy Giuliani was sort of dismissed by a lot of the, quote, mainstream media, and everyone treated those false claims as they were because it was obvious they were just sort of throwing anything out there. This was about a month after, they had that infamous press conference at Four Seasons Total Landscaping. And, this is when the elite strike force team, quote unquote, including Jenna Ellis, was also offering her testimony. Today, they actually had testimony that they played from Jenna Ellis in which she took the fifth several times over and over and over again. I took the fifth, I took the fifth, I took the fifth. But this came in December, and this was when Rudy Giuliani was being, parodied on SNL because of these ridiculous claims that he was making about the election. But there were real world consequences for this. And Shaye Moss talked about how this really just did take over her life. She talked about shutting down, her Facebook Messenger because she was getting all of this racist garbage coming into her inbox, shutting down her LinkedIn account as well. Even Pinterest people went after. Even after she moved because of the threat she was receiving, they found her new address and sent her clippings of her own face in them. So just these sort of vague, threatening messages, all sort of with this layer of racism all around them. And she talked about how she thinks, Rudy has compared them to bank robbers and drug dealers because when he looks at black people, that's what he thinks of. He thinks of drug dealers and bank robbers. So she really, I think, made a compelling case for the jury here. This case probably could end up with Rudy testifying maybe tomorrow, perhaps Thursday, and that will be certainly an interesting event because he's really had trouble holding his tongue and biting his tongue even today afterwards. He may have brought up some new conspiracy theories suggesting the connections that these lawyers who are representing Shaye Moss have and what those mean, and bringing up Hunter Biden as he likes to frequently do. So, I think it'll be quite a spectacle as we go on here, Ali.
Melissa, let's talk about the legal situation here. The culpability in this case is determined. That's already established. The penalty is yet to be determined, and the argument that Rudy Giuliani's team should have and has generally made is that the punishment needs to fit the crime. But they do get a little bit distracted, as Ryan said. He carries on about other things. You wouldn't know this guy was a lawyer, let alone a prosecutor. Talk to me about the legal situation in that courtroom and how you see it unfolding.
Well, what we see is an attorney with a very difficult client. So in court, we have his attorney saying, yes, we admit that these statements were false. We're going to not waste your time contesting issues that don't need to be contested. What we really want to talk about is what's fair and reasonable in terms of damages. They want to argue that a lot of these threats or all of these threats were not done by Giuliani and that he had no reason or no way to, that he didn't cause others to make these threats. And it's those people who actually made the threats that caused the damage, not his statements. Outside of court, you have his client saying, everything I said was true. I didn't lie about anything, contrary to what I said in my filings in court. And the judge's already determination that I, in fact, did make these false statements about these women and caused this damage. So you have the attorney trying to kind of wrangle in his client, and we'll see how far he's able to get with that, especially if he intends to put that client or if that client intends to testify.
Right, that's going to be something to watch. Like I say, I imagine if your client were actually a lawyer themselves and would know how to comport themselves in and outside a court of law. Claire McCaskill, there's nothing victimless about an attempt to overturn an election, and the various indictments indicate that there's real harm to society and democracy. But the one thing that this case does is it really puts human faces on some of this stuff, right? It's not just that maybe my vote was counted or not counted, which is really imperative to democracy. It's that the people who uphold our democracy, precinct by precinct, poll workers like that, are attacked and frightened and harassed. I think that sort of illustrates something for us.
Yeah, I think people forget that one of the reasons elections have been historically secure in the United States is because the authority for those are locally based. Mm-hmm. And it is people like Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss and literally tens of thousands of others who work for public entities and many who volunteer, who control what happens on a local level under the authority of election authorities locally, and then ultimately sometimes the Secretary of State. So it's very hard for anybody to get into the system and fool around because of this disparate control. Now, the irony is Rudy Giuliani knows all that. And the irony is now he's got Smartmatic, he's got Dominion, he's got Ruby and Shay Moss, he's got a sexual assault charge, a civil case against him. And meanwhile, he's hawking sandals and can no longer practice law. And instead of being respectful of the damage he's done, he goes out on the steps of the courthouse last night and does it again. I mean, I can't imagine this jury is going to put up with that. And I can't imagine that he's going to testify in any way that would be sympathetic to them.
Tara, you know, you're a big national political reporter, but some people remember when you were a reporter in this city. Right. The Rudy Giuliani who this city knew, Dave Ehrenberg from Palm Beach was talking about this yesterday. He goes to Palm Beach now, Rudy, and those Trump acolytes are all around, and Rudy is like he's signing autographs, and people are taking pictures with him.
He holds court.
He holds court. What do you make of all of the discussion about whether Rudy Giuliani is unhinged or I don't know what he's trying to do. I can't get a handle on what success looks like for him right now.
Well, I don't think he has a lot of options right now, right? He's been disbarred in various states. He has various indictments involved in multiple legal issues, all related to Trump and his efforts to try to overturn the 2020 elections. He's really at the mercy of Trump right now. His legal bills are at the mercy of Trump right now. I mean, they're asking for $43 million. Yeah. Who is paying for his lawyers? That's the Trump Legal Defense Fund. He's holding events for Rudy Giuliani at his golf course, trying to raise money to keep this guy. And he's he's someone who clearly is desperate to stay in the fold. And, you know, in Trump world, it's all about loyalty. And so that's why I think this has become a political trial for Rudy Giuliani, because he knows he's being watched nationally. He knows he's going to be talked about on the shows like this. So whether his lawyer says something different in court, he's got to stand on those courthouse steps and say, he didn't mean that. This is what I meant. You know, I'm with Trump. And because the next campaign, the 2024 campaign, is an extension of the 2020 dispute that the election was stolen. So he can't say that it wasn't. Yes, Rudy Giuliani was a legend here in New York at one time, and now he's a guy in Palm Beach who doesn't have a law practice and basically needs a pardon from a guy who might be the future president.
It's a good way to put it. Melissa, one of the things that's interesting about the Georgia racketeering case is that the prosecutors there have said they're not all that interested in cutting a deal with Rudy Giuliani or Mark Meadows. These are the two guys closest to Donald Trump at the top of the indictment chain. Tell me why. Why that is the case, because Rudy Giuliani, like Donald Trump, second only to Donald Trump in the number of charges that he faces in various cases. Why not?
Well, typically those at the top of the indictment are those most culpable. And so they really don't have a lot to give. So if you're going to group those together, Donald Trump, Mark Meadows, Rudy Giuliani, all they could give you is they really can't give you anything more than those at the bottom of the indictment that can, you know, they can give you evidence or testimony against themselves, right? So you want to flip those at the bottom of the indictment to get to those 3 or 4 at the top. And so unless they're willing to plead to the indictment, there's really not a lot you can offer them as a prosecutor to induce them to enter a guilty plea.